Welcome to the Great Divorce Podcast, hosted by divorce financial analyst and retirement planning counselor Andrew Hatherley. Join Andrew and guest experts as they help late-life divorcees build the financial and mental foundation for a meaningful future. There is life after divorce. Now, on to the show.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Great Divorce Podcast. I'm really excited about today's episode because it deals with one of my favorite subjects, international travel. But our discussion is going to go deeper than a week's stay at a resort in Cancun or even a river cruise down the Danube. We're going to be talking about living internationally and why this might be something that someone recently divorced in mid to late life might want to explore. My guest today is Jennifer Stevens. Jennifer is the executive editor of International Living magazine. She's been a writer and editor at International Living for more than 25 years, and these days helps steer the ship in the direction of content for readers that's useful, inspiring, and designed to help them live better, more interesting, more international lives. The key is without spending a fortune. Jennifer has traveled extensively through 28 countries in Latin America, the Caribbean, Europe, Asia, and Africa, writing about the best locales for overseas travel, retirement, and investment. Hello, Jennifer. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So happy to have you on the podcast, Jennifer. And, full disclosure, my quote unquote involvement with international living goes back to 35 years, I guess the late 80s, early 90s, when I was in my 20s and bouncing back to my parents' house while I tried to get my life together. And at that time, they were subscribing to a monthly magazine. It came in the mail back in those days, called International Living. And I always made sure to read it cover to cover. And I've subscribed to it intermittently throughout the years as life has taken me on different turns, many international turns. Many listeners, in fact, may not know that I was born in England, grew up in Canada, and have lived in both Mexico and Spain before finally settling in the United States in 1993. So it's a subject near and dear to my heart, and I love the magazine. The only issue I have now is that, with like many magazines, there's no longer a paper format.
I know we all miss the print format, but I have to say there are some advantages to being digital. We're still curating an issue. We're still pulling together an issue the way we always have for 45 years. But we now can embed all kinds of cool stuff inside stories that we couldn't do when it was print. So we have slideshows, we have videos, we have interviews. It's kind of we've made it as more dynamic than it was when it was just a print publication. So I like to think that we're taking advantage of the opportunity to do more with the ideas that we're talking about.
No, you certainly are, and just going through the latest digital episode, as you say, there are links to tons of information. So, more information than we can cover in a half-hour discussion today. So maybe this may end up being a two-parter at some stage. But let's start with the big question, because you hear about international living, and well, actually, let me back up a little bit, because I'm imagining that more Americans are probably wanting to live internationally after COVID and perhaps with the remote technologies now at our disposal. Are you seeing an uptick in people wanting to live internationally?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think if you look back in the 80s, a really small percentage of Americans even had a passport, and now it is like tenfold what it was back then. I mean, we are so much more mobile than we used to be. And the internet really changed things too. Just the onset in the internet, it allows us to find out information about places that you wouldn't find out about before. When I came to International Living in 1996, I mean, we were writing about places that were on the planet, but the only way we knew to write about them was to go and check them out for ourselves, report back and like, this place is really nice. You should live here. Here's how much you can live there for. And we're still doing that, but we're doing it in a much noisier world in a way, because like now that internet has made the world much more accessible to many more people. I think that's a net good thing because it's made us as Americans more aware of the opportunities that are out there. What we feel is sort of our mission in international living is to cut through all of that noise that exists today and really help people prioritize and figure out like what are good, what places are worth your attention and for what reasons, what are not. Opportunities to both save money, to make money, to travel better, to arrange your life in a way that comes sort of life first, I guess. Sometimes that's about money, but sometimes it's about money just because there are certain things you want to have in life, and you can't have those things in the US because the US is expensive, relatively speaking. It really is. And particularly for folks like your audience who may find themselves in a financial situation they didn't expect, that's traumatizing. And also, you just think like, I have to completely rethink what my future is going to look like. Well, if you begin to incorporate opportunities abroad into that thinking, you may find that the sacrifices you thought you had to make, you don't have to make at all. And in fact, your life could be even better than the life that you thought you would have in the US. And so that's kind of the calculus. And that's what we like to help people figure out. We always talk about when people, the number one question people will ask me is sort of, well, where do you think I should go? And that is an impossible question for me to answer because I don't know you, right? I mean, it's hard even when you know someone, because you have to have a really clear understanding in your own mind of, well, what is important to you? Like if you were to sit down and think of if money were no object, what would my best day look like? What would my best life look like? I like to say, and I really believe this is true, if you have a clear idea about that, we at International Living, we can show you where on the planet, a real place where you can make that life your life, and you can do it for less than it would cost you to do it in the United States. I mean, I really believe that's true. And so whether you're interested in living in the beach, I mean, if you want to live in the beach in the US, if you want to live at the beach, it's going to cost you gazillions of dollars, right? I mean, whether you're renting or buying, I mean, if you want a water view, right, but you can go to places around the US and rent a place for, $1,800 in Europe, right, in Europe on the beach, and have a water view. You can buy places for, under 200,000 and be in a beach town, possibly with a view, depending on where you want to be. So the math is completely different overseas. The values you can find are extraordinary when you know where to go look.
It strikes me when you're talking about it, the question you get asked about where should I move, it's similar to the question I get working with people with their finances. How much do I need to retire? Well, I don't know you and I don't know your life. And so it seems to me that what you're doing is very similar to what I'm doing, but from a different angle. I'm helping educate people about divorce and financial planning after divorce, but you're really providing an excellent resource in helping people determine, is international living for me? And if so, what places would best suit the type of life that I have? And the word life, the key four-letter word here, is similarly with my financial planning practice, put the life first and then the money to serve the life. And it seems to be you're very similar, have a standpoint there.
And there's so many different ways to slice it. I mean, I think that people feel often like living an international life and is something that is, it's just intimidating. Like, I don't want to, there's a lot of reasons not to do it, right? You start thinking about it and then you think, well, I mean, how many people, I always joke in the office, how many people walk to their garage, see all the crap in it and are like, I can't deal with this. I don't even know how to get rid of all this stuff. Like, it's just, that's the end of it. They're just going to stay because they can't make themselves go. But the truth is there's so many different ways to lead an international life. First of all, you don't have to go full time. You could still reap a lot of benefits of savings by going part of the year abroad. So that's one thing. You don't have to go forever either. Let's say you do decide you want to go for a year. If you want to go full time, go for a year and check it out. See if you like it. Well, let's say you're trying to hold off on taking your Social Security. Well, one great way to do that is to go abroad for a few years for the window of time that you're trying to not take your not access that Social Security. Go abroad for that amount of time, slash your cost of living in those years. So you're using up some savings, but you're doing it at a much, much slower rate than you would be in the United States. And then when you decide you want to sort of activate your Social Security, take that Social Security, then if you decide you want to come back to the States, good for you, right? I mean, I think there's just a lot of different ways you can slice and dice an international life. We have lots of people that are starting out by saying, I'm going to take 6 months and I'm going to travel around. I'm going to go to, 4 or 6 places in those 6 months and check them out. I'm going to rent an Airbnb, or I'm going to, figure they kind of have decided, well, I'm going to just see where I want to go. And the truth is, when people start doing that and they start spending some time abroad, people their eyes are open, right? All of a sudden they're thinking, well, now I get it. This is why people do this. Like, it's fabulous. It's so much lower stress. People aren't talking about politics. The costs are so much lower. I'm not worried about how much money this costs, because it's stressful to be worried about what things cost, right? I think, part of the advantage to going to a place where the cost of living is so much lower than in the US is that you don't have to count your pennies. You can just take the taxi. You can just go out to dinner. It is just, it lowers people's stress level exceedingly, because you just all of a sudden realize at the end of the month, I've spent almost nothing. I was so much less stressed out and I'm enjoying myself, right? I mean, this is, again, going back to that quality of life idea. There's a lot of good things baked into not being in the US. And I should say, like, it doesn't make you unpatriotic. It doesn't make you a hater of the United States. It just makes you somebody who's putting their life first and including options that are global. And that's not something Americans maybe typically do, but I think that we are doing more now.
There's a couple things you said there. First of all, the rise of the BNB, Airbnb, and part-time accommodations. That makes it so much more feasible for somebody to experiment with the idea of living abroad. Now, we've had the term snowbirds for it's been around forever. Usually is people from Canada or North Dakota coming down to Arizona. Right. But the world essentially is our oyster. Snowbirds can go to Mexico, can go to southern Europe. There's all sorts of places available to them. And even coming from Las Vegas myself, I'm less inclined to be a snowbird than a summer bird, because when it gets to be 115 degrees in July, I see, and this is something that I've thought about in our futures, is my wife and I, is that, it gets to be 115 plus in Las Vegas in July and August. Why not spend a few weeks, or at some stage, even a month or two, at a place that's a little cooler? And with the Airbnb, you can actually kind of live in not a hotel, but a place that's like an apartment or a house, and get a feel for the culture a little bit better over the course of a month or two than you might just, with a week or two in a hotel.
Absolutely. And there are strategies too, for if you're going to stay longer. If you're going to stay for a week, maybe 2 weeks, Airbnb is great. If you want to stay for 2 months or 3 months, you can look on Airbnb, and often people will, homeowners will, if you're going to stay that long, will give you a little bit of a discount for doing that. But there are also, in all of the countries we write about, kind of effectively local versions of Airbnb. There's other ways you can find rentals that are furnished. It's the same idea, but it's kind of local, and you might do it in the local language. Or you just have to kind of know about them. I rented some great places in France last time I was there, and I can't think of the name of the group I went through, but I speak French, so I was able to easily just go and look, and it was much cheaper than Airbnb. So, there's some tricks too to doing that. Sometimes people, I think, look at Airbnb and think, oh, well, if I extrapolate that week to 3 months, that's going to be too expensive. But there are strategies you can employ to lower that cost as well. So just so people
know. You mentioned the key issue, cost of living. And certainly this is important for people recently emerged from divorce. Not everybody. I mean, multimillionaires, that's not going to be a problem for them. But for regular folks emerging from divorce who've seen perhaps their net worth cut in half, and the income from 2 people now reduced to 1, cost of living is a key issue. And so that can be a key determinant to where someone might look, either for a lower cost environment, either in the States or overseas. I suppose it's relative. I'm guessing that international living in France is probably a little bit more expensive than international living in southern Mexico. You tell me.
Just a little. I think that's actually a revelation for people. That's something we've been talking about a lot in the last couple of years. Europe is quite accessible. I mean, we would say if you have between 2,500 and $3,500 a month to live on, you can live extremely comfortably in Europe. Very much. Like, because the cost of living, the cost of living there is just, for the average person, is just lower. They pay higher taxes. They pay a higher tax rate than we do typically in the US. However, for their taxes, they are getting a lot of services. And so the healthcare is subsidized. The arts are subsidized. Even the buses and metros and everything else cost less than they do here. And so when you kind of take your Social Security and a little more and you take it to France or Spain or Portugal or Italy, I mean, you're going to find that your cost of living, it really is lower than here. And I think that shocks people, because if they go on vacation to Paris and they stay in a really nice hotel, it's expensive. And that is true. But most of France is not Paris, and the French do not. I think the average salary in France is somewhere around $65,000 a year. Like, it's not very high. And for that, the people are living extremely comfortably. And so you'll find that the cost of living in Europe and everywhere else that we write about is lower than in the US. So we write about really places all over the world. So Southeast Asia, we write about Thailand and Vietnam, Cambodia. We write in Europe, as I said, about Italy and France and Spain and Portugal and other places too. We're starting to write about Central Europe more as well. And there's some interesting places. Greece, we write about Greece. And then in Latin America, we write all about places, all like Mexico, all through Central America, South America, Uruguay, Argentina, Ecuador. We write about Panama, Belize. Yeah, all kinds of places. So you've got lots of options. Again, we kind of come at it, what's your interest first? Do you want to be somewhere warm? Do you want to be somewhere not as warm? Are you interested in being in a city or not in a city? Do you want to have access to a beach, or you don't care about a beach? Does humidity bother you, or doesn't it bother you? So once you kind of answer all those kinds of questions, we can help point you to specific towns, specific places that we think that should be on your radar screen.
You mentioned, because there's such a smorgasbord of countries around the world. And I guess one concern, because you mentioned Argentina, so I want to pick up on that. I'm a student of Latin American history, and no offense to any Argentine listeners out there, but the country, it's had its fair share of instability, both politically and economically, over the years. I'm being very generous with my words here, and even right now there are major issues there. So obviously,
yeah.
some people are probably going to have that's something people have to be aware of. It's one of the major issues
Oh, yeah.
in determining.
Absolutely. And I will say that I think, we're not telling people to go and retire to Argentina, to be honest. It's a place we're saying you definitely can still go and visit if you want, but it's not a place we're actually saying that retirement is probably, we wouldn't recommend you necessarily go and buy some place there. By contrast, neighboring Uruguay is quite interesting. You could argue that Uruguay is, I've been calling it the easiest, fastest, smartest way to get yourself and your money outside of the United States. I mean, Uruguay it functions exceedingly well. It is kind of in the same time zone as we are. It's not on the other side of the planet. It's sort of just south of us. So you're not, if you're working, you can still work from there relatively easily. Uruguay just works. And if you have your papers in order, you can show up at the door and get a residency. While you're applying for permanent residency, you can just live there. They'll let you live there. They'll give you your stamp. I mean, so it is the fastest, easiest, most expedient way to get yourself out of the country, if that's something that's important to you. Just like speed with which to depart and be completely, long-term there. You can do that in Uruguay easier than anywhere else. It's very European, right? It doesn't feel,
Yeah.
it's a sort of an interesting country. Most of our readers don't go to Uruguay, I will say. It is far away.
Most of our readers, quite a haul to get down there.
It's far away. Yeah. I mean, but it's an interesting option. But most people, I would say that Mexico probably has more Americans retired in it, or older folks. And we don't write exclusively to older folks. You made reference to this. In many years ago, it used to be we would write almost exclusively about retiring overseas, because countries were happy to have retirees come and spend their money there, but they didn't want anybody to take a job from a local. that is still true, but that now that we have digital nomads, now that people can work remotely, countries have gotten wise in the last 3 years, and they have figured out we should create visas for these people who can come and they'll keep working their job at home, but they'll get their money and then they'll spend it here, and we can give them a function. We can let them do that. We're happy to have them do that. So the world of living internationally really has opened up extensively since that happened, because it used to be you had to jump through a lot more hoops to get a visa. But now, even if you're not retired, there's this digital nomad world has kind of opened the door for people and made it more accessible.
I know one of the favorite things I wait for every year with international living is your global retirement index, and in that, correct me if I'm wrong, you're looking at the top destinations for retirement, and what you're doing is you're weighting some of these categories that
Yeah.
we've discussed, and perhaps you could go over your retirement index and how that might
Absolutely.
help people.
Yeah, this is a really, it's designed to be a tool that genuinely is helpful for people. So we compare, contrast, rank, and rate upwards of, I think the number of countries changes annually. It just depends, because sometimes places are worth going and sometimes they're not, and for various reasons, and the world is not static. So things change, of course, but it's about 15 countries. And we have ranked them around across, I think it's 9 categories, everything from cost of housing, healthcare, accessibility, how easy it is to settle. Because, if you think I'd love to have a more international life, but I don't speak another language, or I'm not really that well traveled, it's important to, that'll be important to you to go to somewhere where there are other expats, right? Where other people are going to speak English, and people have made a path for you ahead of time. And so that's one of the measures. If you speak fluently another language, and like I speak fluent French, so that's not a deterrent for me, right? But it might be for other people who don't. So this index is really meant to help, to be a tool, a practical tool to help you figure out if these are the categories you should be thinking about across the top, and then along the side we have the countries, and everything gets a weighted number. And of course, there's it's by design meant to be subjective. It isn't. This is the thing. There's a lot of data out there in the world. There's a lot of information, and some of it is reliable and some of it is not. And statistics tell a story that countries want those statistics to tell. Often they're not necessarily super reliable, or a reason that you would choose a place. And so while we include some stats in our measure, we're also doing really in-depth dives with expats who live in the countries that we're measuring, and we're asking them to answer all of these questions. And they're giving country scores, we're helping to compare them to other people's scores, and we are basing this index on real world lived experience. And so even though we are in macro, we are rating countries, what we're really doing is rating the areas in these countries where we believe people should go. And so, for example, Roatan is on our retirement index, because if you really want the Caribbean, if you really want just an absolutely beautiful Caribbean island with tall palm trees and white sands, and you want that laid back, no shirt, no shoes, no problem kind of life, Roatan ought to be on your radar. However, Roatan is technically part of Honduras. And do we recommend all of Honduras as a place to go retire? We do not,
Right.
but we do recommend Roatan. So keeping that in mind as people are looking at that index. But it's a great place to start, because it gives you sort of a blunt instrument by which to focus yourself, I guess, and eliminate some places and get excited about other places. So we put that out every year. We're just about to get started on the 2025 one, because it takes a lot of months to pull all that stuff together. And we take it really seriously, actually. There's not really anything else out there that's like it, but it's meant to be and I think has shown to be a really useful tool for people to explore their options.
I appreciate what you said, Jennifer, about distinguishing areas within a particular country, because I know many times I'll hear someone say, well, I think I may retire to Mexico. But where in Mexico? Because it's such a geographically diverse country. You've got, the Mayan Riviera, like the area south of Cancun, Playa del Carmen, Tulum, which is that very Caribbean Atlantic, beautiful beaches. But you've also got and it's also very hot. and maybe subject to the occasional hurricane. And then you've got the colonial highlands of Mexico, like San Miguel de
Right.
Allende, Querétaro, Guanajuato, much more temperate climate. Um, if you're interested in the arts and culture, maybe there's probably more of that in that area. So it's there are certainly
Yeah,
different regions.
absolutely. And I should say too that, of course, we can't guarantee that, that there isn't going to be like pickpocketing or something like that happening in places. But I should say too that every place that we recommend, every community that we recommend are communities where we feel comfortable and we feel saying that this is a safe place to go. Because of course, that's the first measure, right? Does a place make sense? It might be cheap, but cheap is not a reason to go somewhere. Cheap is
Right.
just the starting point, right? Like
Right.
if it's a good value, we're more concerned with the value than we are with the price, if that makes sense. Like, so everywhere we're writing about is going to cost less, but what we want to make sure is that we're sending people where that lower cost is buying them a big life, right? That's the important part. And so, you can do that and do that safely and comfortably and in an environment where you'll feel welcome in all the places that we recommend. And there are other places around the world you can go, and people will email us and say, well, I like this little town. I'm like, well, that's great. I'm sure that's lovely, but you speak fluent Spanish and you are the only expat there. So for a broader audience, that's probably not the best place for us to send people. If you would like to tell your story to our audience so that the people who are like-minded and read that and are inspired by it will come and visit you and see that town, that would be great. We'll pay you for that, right? Like, come and tell us your story.
Yeah.
I think that's something that is really important to us, that I think I mentioned this before, just that lived experience. What we're doing is we are relying on expats in the places that they're writing about to tell us what's really going on. Because there's a lot of stories out there that are written by AI. There are all of these sort of YouTubers wandering around the planet and, flinging themselves through a town for a week and saying, this is what you need to know. And that's very different than spending a year living someplace, or 2 years or 10 years, as is the case with some of our correspondents. And so it's really important to us that information be, accurate and be, and have a little bit of insight to it. It's not just where to go eat dinner, but it's also what is life like in these places. And this is the kind of thing that would appeal to X, Y, and Z kind of person. And that's what we're in the business of doing, kind of cutting through the top level stuff and going a little bit deeper and trying to be very authentic in what we're telling you about a place, because no place is perfect and there's no one size fits all places, but there are lots of places where you can go where, people can live really comfortably. And you and I had spoken, I think there is some, when you are outside of the US, all of a sudden looking in, it's just a different, you're able to reinvent yourself to a degree. I think that it can be harder to do in the United States, because in the US, you're still the person that you always were, with all of the baggage that comes with that. And you don't leave your baggage, your baggage comes with you when you go abroad. However, you are in a new environment, you're making new friends. And one thing that expats will always say is that it is surprisingly easy to make friends abroad, certainly among other expats, because you automatically have something in common with them. You all have this little sense of adventure. You're all trying something new. And so people tend to help each other out. And they also tend to come from a pretty broad swath of society. And that is very interesting for folks too. That's something that expats will say that they didn't expect, but that they very much appreciate, that this friend is a retired doctor, and that friend is a retired waiter, and this friend is, a retired mechanic, and they all get on because they have things in common. They're all volunteering together at the animal shelter, or they're all, and I think that in our US today, things are so divisive that people really appreciate that kind of step away, where it feels in some ways like you're almost stepping back in time, I think. And that really does happen. So that's kind of a benefit of being abroad, even if you just go for a month or 2 or 3 and to get away and to have a little breathing space. It doesn't have to be super expensive to do that.
Well, that sense of community and relationships with other people is so important. And as you mentioned, you have a community of people who are focused on their new lives in this new place with new interests, and perhaps, I would imagine, much less inclined to the sort of easy fallback divisiveness that we find, in the country right now, particularly in the political realm. And for the people listening to this program, the idea of resetting and adventures and new beginnings, emerging from divorce. It's something on many of their minds, and as the international community or finding a community of people similarly oriented can be a great boon to that idea of recreation. But I have to mention, also many of our listeners are going to be older and can't have this conversation without discussing the key issue quite often with women emerging from divorce a little bit more than men, but men also is health insurance. And you've got to hear that this is going to be one of the primary cost of living, obviously the great draw. But language is can be an obstacle for some people. Others embrace learning languages. But I think the issue of health insurance comes up a lot.
Yeah, for sure. And a couple things I would say about that I think we have the false notion in the United States that we have the best healthcare in the world. We have great healthcare when you can access it in the United States, but in the rest of the world, healthcare is fabulous. I mean, of course, not every single place in the rest of the planet, but certainly that's a consideration. That's one of the things on our retirement index, like how accessible and how good and how affordable is the healthcare in the countries that we're considering, and we give it a rating. I mean, you literally can look down the column. Healthcare, part of the reason that these countries are more affordable, and I mean, I'm talking about Mexico or Panama, and really any of the countries we talk about, is because the cost of healthcare is so much lower. So, for example, in Costa Rica, Costa Rica has excellent healthcare. It gets rated much higher than the United States healthcare system regularly. The New Yorker did a huge story about it a couple of years ago about how fabulous the life expectancy is in Costa Rica and how great their healthcare is. And, Costa Rica is a place where people go for health services because they are so much better than in the United States. So if you're living there, you get to access it all the time.
I've got clients going to Mexico for dental work all the time.
For dental work, right? Particularly done, and it's good in Costa Rica as well. So, that you have to join if you decide to live in Costa Rica full time, you're going to become a permanent resident, you're going to stay there, you will have to pay into the Caja. The Caja is the public healthcare service, and that costs between like 7 and 11% of your stated income. So let's say your Social Security is $1,200 a month. That's what your qualifying income was to get you residency in Costa Rica. So you would pay, as a single, you might pay anywhere about maybe $85 a month to have what is effectively to access the Caja. Now, the Caja is public health. And if you just have a cold, that's great. You can just go to the clinic and they'll take care of it. It's free for you, right? You're not paying when you go. However, most expats also have a private health insurance, which you can get in all of these other countries that we write about. And it just costs so much less. It's pretty much what we have in the US in terms of how insurance works. But you might pay, for example, in Costa Rica, if you wanted just a basic policy that had like a $10,000 deductible, but it includes all your basic stuff that you would need, that would cost around $2,600 a year, whereas something comparable in the States would be more like $6,800 a year. And keep in mind too, that then the cost of getting actual care is so much lower than the cost in the United States. So, I mean, something that might cost like a hip replacement that might cost $40,000 in the US would cost maybe $4,000 in Costa Rica. So, I mean, some people they're in the Caja, they pay for a basic health insurance, but then they're just paying out of pocket for most of the stuff that they need, right? But I mean, these are the things that you have to figure out. It's part of what we do at International Living, is help people sort through what those options are and what the costs are. We have events every year, like our big how to move, like how to go overseas boot camp it's actually in Las Vegas, where you are, this coming year in October. One of the gentlemen we have there deals with international health insurance and talks about, like, this is what your options are, and this is how much it's going to cost, and these are the questions you need to ask. And in our correspondence in all of our countries, that's part of their presentation, is like, this is the situation with the healthcare. This is what you need to know. If healthcare, if you're not in great health, then you're not going to want to go to some of these places, right? But if healthcare is, Panama City has excellent healthcare, and you can be at the beach, you can live at the beach an hour from Panama City and be able to access hospitals that are Johns Hopkins affiliated hospitals an hour from you. So, I mean, there's all kinds of ways you can, if you have pre-existing conditions, that's not a reason not to go necessarily. But healthcare is something you have to figure out. for sure. But there are solutions, I guess, is what was my message, that it is figure outable. You
Right,
just have to ask the
right.
right questions and get the right information.
That's terrific, Jennifer. Where can people find out more about all these resources you're talking about with international living? What's the best place to find this
Yeah,
information?
go to internationalliving.com, www.internationalliving.com. We have lots of good information on there. We have a free e-letter that you can register for, to sign up for. It's right there on the front page, and it comes every day. If you don't like it, you can unsubscribe, but I think you'll like it. It's called our daily postcards, and there's no cost associated. So that's a great way to kind of get into our world and see what we're doing. And there's lots of great information just for free out on our website too. So definitely worth going and digging around in there.
Jennifer, I really appreciate your coming on the Great Divorce podcast and giving people a taste of international living. And I think I'm going to be pleading with you for a part two, because there's just so much more to discuss here. But I'm really grateful for your time. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. You're welcome. I'd love to come back. That'd be great. Thanks.
Thanks so much for tuning in to this episode of the Great Divorce Podcast. To learn more or get in contact with your host, you can visit Andrew's website at transcendretirement.net. Also, please feel free to rate, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. That helps others find the show, and we greatly appreciate it. Thanks again for listening, and we'll catch you in the next episode.
Information provided is educational only and should not be construed as legal or tax advice. Each situation is unique and should be discussed with your tax or legal advisor prior to implementation. Andrew Hatherley is not an attorney and does not provide legal advice. Information provided is financial in nature. Advisory services offered through Hatherley Capital Management, LLC. Divorce financial analysis services offered through Wiser Divorce Solutions, an affiliated company.